So I just did a valve adjustment on my 2006 Yamaha R6, and I wanted to make a video just kind of describing what I did and how it went, and the after effects and how it felt before and issues I was having, and just kind of explain all that. And hopefully this will be really informational if you have an R6 through any year, or maybe even an R1. But yeah, so some of the symptoms I was having was when I first would turn on the bike, it would idle really rough. It almost sounded like the cam chain was loose, like the cam chain was slapping around a bit, and then maybe once oil got to the cam chain tensioner and it fully extended, then it stopped. So I wasn't sure if that was a cam chain tensioner or if it was needing a valve adjustment, but I found a forum online that specifically said this guy had the exact same problem that I was having. It would do it intermittently. So sometimes you would turn on the bike and it was cold and you wouldn't hear a thing. It would sound great. Sometimes you'd turn it on when it was warm and it would rattle a bit for the first couple seconds and then it would go away. For me, it would always go away. I never had it last for more than 6 seconds, and sometimes it would last for a couple seconds, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. It just really depended. And it wasn't every time I started the bike that it would happen, and it would always go away. So he said eventually what had to be done was he got a valve adjustment, and I think he replaced the cam chain tensioner, and that fixed his issues. And so far I've only put 20 miles on the bike, but I did test it. Have started it 4 or 5 times, and I don't hear that noise anymore, that rattling. It sounds like it'll rattle a bit when the bike first starts. Sounds like it's just exactly coming from the cam chain tensioner, like it's loose or something, or something's kind of grinding. So I haven't had that issue yet. So I don't know what all I did. I did many things in this session of maintenance to the bike, so I really can't pinpoint which one it is. So the first thing I did is I did a valve adjustment, and then I replaced my cam chain tensioner with a new one. So this is the old cam chain tensioner. I believe when I ordered the new one in 2008 and up, they changed this a little bit, and so actually the new one I bought was for the 06, but I think the part number for the 08 overlapped to the 06-07. So when you order a cam chain tensioner for the 06-07, even though this was the original one they put in, it looks a little different than this. I probably shouldn't have put on the fairings, but pretty much the new one just looks less scraped up, and it has this part right here doesn't stick out as much. It's just like sticks out about 2 millimeters up and is smooth. Besides that, it looks pretty much exactly the same. So I don't know if there's a difference between them, or if one functions better or lasts longer than the other. But yeah, you can hopefully barely see the new one in there. I don't know if that's gonna pick up, but yeah, that's a new one, and this is the old one. And then when I replaced my spark plugs, I don't think I gapped them when I put them in because they're gapless or whatever. But when I did take them out, I went ahead and gapped them. They were about 0.1 millimeters off or 0.01 millimeters off. It was a decent size. It was like a shim off on these, I think. So I did that. Also, I set the idle screws. I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but I do think it has to do with the idle. And so there's 4 screws, little flathead screws underneath each throttle body that you unscrew. And I watched a video of a guy having similar issues with his bike dying when it was cold, and mine was having the exact same issue. So when my bike was running and it was cold, if I just turn it on and let it idle until it reached 160 degrees, it was fine and I wouldn't have any issues. But if I gave the bike throttle between whatever temperature it was at and 160 degrees, the bike would turn off. It would falter. I would give it halfway throttle and then let off, and then the bike would slowly start to die and then die after a couple seconds. And that would happen really frequently. In fact, that even was happening when I first bought the bike. When I first started the bike up, and I was letting it idle for about maybe 45 seconds to 2 minutes, and then I gave it like half throttle and let off, and the bike actually died. And so that's been happening since I bought the bike, actually. So it's not like something that started happening just now. But I read somewhere that a guy had his valve adjusted and many different things done, and like the throttle set right and everything, and it still had the same issues. And then I saw this video of a guy with an R1 who adjusted those throttle screws all the way in and then 180 degrees out, and it fixed the issue. So I think it also fixed my issue as well, because mine would die when you let off throttle until the bike got warm. And it even started doing it once the bike was hot. It would randomly die every once in a while. It was really after giving it throttle, and then you'd pull on the clutch and then it would go out. I also found that sometimes the clutch switch can go out, and that causes the same issue. I know I read a forum where a guy pulled in the clutch sometimes and the bike would die every time. So definitely check your continuity, or how the clutch switch is supposed to function properly as well. I also clean and lubed my throttle cables and my clutch cables. I cleaned my air filter, which I think was a big one, and then I changed the screws back. I screwed them all the way in and back out 180 degrees. And when I did that, I think my far left one was a quarter turn out, my mid left one was an eighth of a turn out, and my mid right one was an eighth of a turn out, maybe a little bit more, and my far right one was over half a turn out. I think one of them is marked white. In the service manual, they say that you're supposed to, I think, hook up this whole compression tester with tubes and stuff, and then adjust those accordingly. I don't have that, and it's definitely fixed my issue, and it hasn't caused any trouble at all. And I think it's mainly just to do with a smoother idle. So if you're having that issue, I can't say that it'll fix the issue. I can't even say that maybe you might even lose horsepower by doing this. I don't know. I don't exactly know what those screws do, but I know that it fixed my problem, and my bike is still running great, and there's no loss of power at all. So I did adjust those screws. I did do a valve adjustment, which I'll throw in a clip of me in the middle of that. And I guess that was the thing that took the most time, because you have to take off all the fairings, and I had to buy a torque wrench for that. You got to make sure and torque the cams right. So just a brief overview is exhaust is supposed to be 0.16 to 0.23 millimeters as far as the gap, using these shims. On my exhaust side, every one of them was pretty far off. So on my far left, it was 0.04. Below that, I couldn't even fit my 0.04 shim or a feeler gauge in there, so it was less than that. 0.06 was this one, and so they were all way off. You can see some of my numbers. These were the numbers I first measured. So the 0.04x means it didn't fit, and then minuses, obviously it was below something of 0.04. Then here at the bottom was after I replaced the shims. Those are my values. This one was like kind of close between 0.15 and 0.16. I was running into the shims I got. It's difficult because each size has only three shims, and so it's kind of difficult to know how many you'll need on each one. And this is the one I bought. It's worked great for my Yamaha, and so it's difficult to know. I only had, at the end, I ran out of one or two shim sizes, and so I had to go up one or down one, but it still worked out good. It still is a lot better than it was. So it really helped my exhaust side. Again, most of these were, I think all of them were within value. This one was close to being 0.01 off. It might have been 0.15. I think it was 0.16 when I measured it the last time though. On my intake side, only two of them were in spec, so that was good. Just left those alone, and then the rest I had to adjust. This one was between 0.1 and 0.13. That one was 0.1. So as valves wear, they get tighter. I kind of thought when I first opened everything up that things would wear, so obviously things would be looser, but that's not necessarily the case, because when the valve goes up and down and hits against, it closes, it gets worn down that way. So it has more room up top when the valves are cycling and the camshaft is rotating. That's why these valves, all of mine, have gotten tighter, not looser. And so these are all my values at the end: 0.13, 0.13, 0.14. So they were all in spec now. So my biggest question was like, was I gonna gain a bunch of power, or what would happen after a valve change or a valve adjustment? And so personally, I don't think I gained any power at all. I do feel like I did gain power, but I think that's mainly related to me cleaning the air filter. I have a K&N, and it was pretty dirty. It wasn't bad at all, but it was pretty dirty. I had maybe about 5,000 miles on it, and so once I cleaned that, I think that's the biggest thing. Like I do feel like it had a bit more power when I took it out, and that it definitely ran smoother and everything. But I think it was mainly because I cleaned the air filter, not necessarily because of the valves. I mean, adjusting these, a certain amount of millimeters, you probably won't see any big horsepower gain at all. Maybe 1 or 2 horsepower if they're way off. But don't do this expecting that you're going to gain horsepower. It's mainly because it'll make the valves last longer, and they're supposed to be in spec. I wasn't the engineer that created the bike, so I can't really explain that exactly. But it was due on the maintenance list, and so I did that. And my bike had 25,000 miles, and my valve adjustment was due at 26,000 miles. And so obviously mine were way out 1,000 miles before then. So if I were you and you have a sport bike, an inline 4-cylinder sport bike, check your valves well before it says to, because most likely they'll probably be off, unless you baby the bike and don't ever go above a certain RPMs. But I think with any sport bike, it's gonna have some pretty heavy wear on it. So yeah, I don't think I gained power from it. I think that was mainly the little bit of power I do feel now is probably because I cleaned the air filter, because that, if anything, is gonna add more flow to the bike than anything else. But yeah, like I said, it definitely fixed the idle issue. It fixed my dying issue. When the bike was cold and it was warming up, and I would give it throttle and then let off, and then the RPMs would falter, and then slowly it would just die after a couple seconds. So far I've only put 20 miles on the bike. I've only started it 5 or 6 times, but everything seems to be working good, and I'm very grateful and blessed to have done all of that and put everything back together properly. Also, another thing, it is essential that you have the service manual when you're doing this. I definitely would not have been able to do this without the service manual. It took me about 5 minutes to find a PDF of it online, and that's what I religiously followed during the whole process. Also, how do you take off the camshafts and how do you put them back on? It's a little tricky. Again, definitely use a torque wrench when you're taking it off. You don't necessarily need one, but when you're putting it on, you want to make sure to torque it to spec. So in the service manual, it says to do it in a crisscross pattern from the outside in, I believe, when you're taking off the cam. So let's say there's a bolt on each one of these. All right, so you start from here. This is what I did. I rotated it about half a turn right here, and then half a turn right here, and then half a turn, and then I went inside and kept going inside until I got to the inside most bolts, and then I went back and did the exact same thing. And the further out I got on the camshafts and the less pressure there was on the camshafts, the more I rotated it. Arguably, you could go, a total of 3 times of, undo this bolt, 4 rotations, and then undo this bolt. But I just took my time and did it really slowly and went back and forth and back and forth. And that took a while, but that's how I took both camshafts off. The bike is running great. Everything is good. So I'm pretty sure I did it right and I didn't mess anything up. To put it back on, I think you do it the opposite way, so you go from the inside out. So I tighten this, two turns on this one, and then 2 turns on this one, and then two, just crisscross from the inside out when you're putting it back on. Also, another thing, definitely mark where your cam chain is. You can kind of figure out where it's all supposed to be, but I felt that the easiest way was to mark where the cam chain was in relation to the gear at the bottom, and then the 2 locations at the top. That way, once I put everything back together, I just lined those marks up and I knew it was where it was before, and that's all I had to worry about. Again, watch videos on it, look up in the service manual. You have to have the service manual to do it. Just follow it religiously, and I don't think you'll have an issue. And I think if you're having issues with the bike dying randomly or dying when it's cold and you give it some throttle, definitely check those idle set screws that I'm referring to. I'll try and throw up a picture because I don't have the bike apart anymore, so I can't really show. Maybe I can throw a picture when the bike was out. But yeah, hopefully that was informational. I probably forgot to go over a couple things, but oh yeah, one last thing is, how do you know if your feeler gauges are accurate or if your shims are accurate? That's why you need a caliper or a micrometer, and so you can just double check the measurements of all these. I didn't have any issues. Every time I measured either one of my shims or these feeler gauges, they were all pretty much spot on, so I didn't really worry about measuring each one I did, because after I measured a few, I was like, okay, all of these are pretty much spot on. Also, how tight is it supposed to be when you stick in the feeler gauge to each one? It's kind of difficult to know, so it took some practice, and it's more of a feel thing. But pretty much, if the feeler gauge won't go in with a pretty decent amount of push on it, don't force it. You shouldn't have to bend these to get them in. And so you can tell on this one, start right here, I did a 0.18 millimeter feeler gauge, and it wouldn't go in. So I went down one more, and then I did a 0.15, and it was very snug. It was very tight. It was hard to push in and pull out. So that probably wasn't the actual measurement. But 0.13, it was snug. It was some drag on it, but it wasn't too much. It wasn't anything too crazy. And just kind of a good representation I found is you can put something like, decently weighted, just like a half a pound or something, with a piece of paper, and that drag you feel of the piece of paper is kind of about what you'll feel when you're pulling in and out the shim. So it should have some drag to it, but it shouldn't be too hard to where it's really kind of grinding. It really feels like it's really tugging. It also shouldn't be too loose. You shouldn't be able to just slide it in and out really easily. That's probably too loose on it. But yeah, that's just kind of tips and stuff on what it'll feel like when you're using the feeler gauges. So yeah, hope this video helped. And there's a lot more details that goes into this that I won't mention because it's in the service manual, such as you have to go from cylinder 1 and then rotate the camshaft, and then go to cylinder 2, rotate the camshaft, then go to 4 on the opposite side, rotate the camshaft, then go to number 3. And each time you have to do it like 180 degrees, so a half a turn and then a half a turn to 360 degrees, and it tells you all how to do that. But yeah, it took forever, but so far the bike is running a lot smoother, and just the way it sounds is smoother, and it feels better, and overall I think it was well worth it. But I don't have time to make a whole video on this, but trying to do a valve adjustment on the R6. It was due, and they're definitely out of spec, as I found. All of them but 2 of the intakes were out. Way out. The exhaust was way too tight. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You just got to really take your time once you get into the camshaft. Take off all the fairings and move the radiator to the front and take off the tank. I just don't have time to video all that. Take off the gas tank. It's pretty straightforward. It's this bolt, those 2, and the one on the side. Lift the whole thing out, disconnect the plugs, take your time. And then take off the top part of the air box, disconnect those plugs. I just kind of set mine to the side. And then from the inside of the air box, you just undo these bolts that go up under there. And then after that, unplug everything from there. And then these, you have these clips that go underneath right here. Can't really see it. Yeah, there's 4 of them. Those 4 you undo. Just undo the clips and the wires and everything to it, and gently take your time taking it out. And then you got pretty decent access. Take off the coils and the spark plugs. Good time to replace those. And so yeah, I've just been working on this the past couple days after work. And yeah, so I have one of the camshafts off right now. I put the exhaust side on.